We've got Chad Nuss, VP at PandaDoc, and Ryan O'Hara, VP at LeadIQ. Today we are kind of doing a live breakdown of the data we collected a couple months back here at Sales Hacker. We asked over 1,000 salespeople, sales ops, RevOps, anybody in the revenue org, go-to-market org, what they think about sales tech and where the space is at. So we have some interesting results we wanted to dig into with a couple of experts. I don't think there's a better word than expert in the space. So we have some big picture questions about sales space, sales tech. We have some specifics to get into around tools and adoption and ROI. But to kick it off, we wanted to start with just very big picture, trying to get a sense of, Ryan, your sales philosophy, Chad, your sales philosophy. Ryan, before the call, you mentioned we saw a shift to remote, like 8 years worth of a shift to remote in a matter of a few months over the past year and a half, right? I don't think that's news to anybody. But I'm curious what you think has changed in the sales space specifically as a result, and how folks are using sales tech and organizing their team and just handling that shift.
This is going to sound crazy, but I'm going to go on a rant for a second and kind of explain this and see if I can get back to this main point. Last year, we saw a big shift, obviously, of people going home and working from home and stuff. And what it did basically is it led to this mesh of personal life and professional life kind of merging together. You get on a Zoom call with somebody, you see their kid come up and crawl in their lap, or a puppy or a cat or whatever's happening. You see that mesh of your personal and your professional life kind of merging. The other thing that's happened is you've had to trust your sales reps to be themselves a little bit more and be comfortable with them because you're not micromanaging them in an office anymore. With those two shifts happening over the course of last year, now petering into this year, and some people are going back to offices, but some people are still remote. You just hired a bunch of remote people probably. One of the things that we're seeing is that you have to differentiate and put yourself a little bit more into the prospecting that you're doing than you could a year ago or 2 years ago. In the old days, you could personalize something based on a person's name, company, and title, basically, and that was enough to go after someone. The problem is everybody's doing that. Now you have to find things you have in common with a prospect, and if you can do that, you're more likely to actually build up a good pipeline. That shift is kind of happening not just in sales; it's actually happening in business. We're checking and answering calls on our cell phones now. We're looking at email on our phones, and you have to be mindful of what someone's going through in their life. It's less predictable than them just being at a conference room before a meeting or sitting at their cubicle or something. There's a different experience going on in their life, and that mesh is changing the culture of sales and how we interact with prospects. So that's kind of my preamble on it. As a result, people are buying more technology. They're buying more data. They're building better processes so that you don't have to micromanage someone as much when they're going through the sales process. I'll popcorn it over to Chad.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, like, not far off. I'll just kind of dovetail into being personal and being authentic in sales. To your point about having your cell phone here and us working in our homes and seeing a little bit more about somebody actually breaks down a little bit of that. What used to be like dress up and go to a meeting, now we're just all in front of everybody. Everything's showcased. You can see, my downstairs and my dog, and so that changes the way we all interact. And being personal and being authentic is actually something good that needs to happen in sales. And LinkedIn and a lot of different studies have been showing that buyers don't believe sellers. Buyers don't want a seller in the cycle sometimes. And that's because sellers have traditionally been seen as non-authentic, scummy people who are trying to sell you on something. Well, yes, we are, but if you can do it in an authentic and original and meaningful and personal way, and take advantage of the fact that we're all living here, I think that's a really, important piece. And at a macro level to that, way back when they were saying, B2B is acting a lot more like B2C these days. And people are like transacting online a little bit more and chatting with salespeople and getting 2/3 of the way through a sales process before they even talk to a salesperson. Well, it's here. That discussion is actually here now. So we have to change as sellers the way we approach the buyer. in different ways as well. And so when we talk about B2C interaction, we're talking more of a personalized one-to-one relevant interaction, not I'm going to send out 1,000 emails to somebody who told me this was my ideal customer profile, but actually work at an individual basis. So if you're personable, you're professional, you're authentic on your side, your seller persona, and the buyer persona is looking for personalization and relevancy, then you can be a great seller. So that's kind of a little bit of the top level thought process over here.
Yeah. I got to follow up before we dig into the data, because it sounds like you both are on the same page here. How do you think the shift, both that kind of shift to a streamlined buy-in experience and remote, has impacted how people are prioritizing their sales stack and the tech that they're buying? Because my sense is, you can tell me if I'm wrong, my sense is a streamlined buying experience, or make it as easy as possible for the buyer and the customer, means a much more complicated tech stack underneath that experience. So how has that shift impacted buying decisions?
Yeah. You want to go first, Ryan?
I was wondering, I'm like, who goes first?
I'll go. Yeah. So the answer is yes. We require more technology to do our daily tasks. The problem that we have that we're seeing is that because we've been adding lots of different technology, on average 6 to 8 different tools in our toolbox, we don't have a single pane of glass that we're looking at anymore. So what we're looking at is going between tabs. If you look at a seller's tabs these days, all right, and you just kind of do a little ride along with people, it's incredible. Tab, 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 tab. All right. And then you've got Google Sheets and Google Docs and Google Slides and and it's just a lot. And so as we function in this new reality of I'm a remote seller, I interact like this now with all these tabs and things. There are people being left behind. Is the point. There are sellers who come into this who are tech savvy, who can go and click per minute on all the tabs. You watch these people and they flow through, no problem. Well, we have some people that have a little bit of gray, or people that are new to the industry, both the aged independent, who are less thoughtful, slower as it relates to tech. And so those people are getting left behind, and they're good sellers. They know how to close. They have all the right selling techniques. And just because an app is in front of them, they're actually moving slower and doing worse. So trying to get the adoption back of looking at everybody depending on what their seller personality profile is and making sure that they can use it is critical. So single pane of glass, dead. Tabs here. App people who are savvy, quick. People who just be like, I know how to close deals, slower. So we got to work on that.
There used to be a survey that they would do at like Dreamforce and stuff. And I remember seeing the data that says that sellers basically only spend about a third of their time actually selling. They have to administer and use a bunch of tools. They have to do research on their prospects. They have to read up about people. They have to come up with all these different things that they want to say. If you actually map out and sit down and look at what a rep is going through to have to reach out to somebody on just the prospecting end, that's not even including after they're already a deal. It's super complicated. And what you want to do is that shift that Chad talked about with B2Bs turning more like B2C, you actually want to operationally think of your sales process the same way too. You want to make it as easy as possible for someone to actually do a meaningful activity with the time that they have. Because you figure working from home, you probably have 40 or 50 hours a week that you can actually do work between administrative stuff, selling, meetings, all that stuff. We'll cut it down. AEs are probably getting 20, 25 hours a week. SDRs are probably getting 30. You start doing that math out and thinking about how are they spending their time? What are they actually doing? No kidding, they're going to have problems with actually buying and using all the stuff that you might be adding to the stack. And you might be complicating the process more. We need to think about it like a UI UX expert.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Every single vendor out there, and people are asking about, what vendors we would recommend. We're going to get into the different stacks in a second. We'll probably hit on that, but I'll just say, guess what all the tech vendors that sell us sales stack are trying to do? They're trying to be the single pane of glass. Gong wants to be the single pane of glass. Outreach wants to be the single pane of glass. LeadIQ wants to be the single pane. PandaDoc wants to be the single pane of glass. And that's the race for the eyeballs. That's the race for the users. So I don't think they've consolidated it yet. There's no elegant way to get a seller to focus on one pain. And that's one of the challenges. And that's why we're going to talk about low adoption rates is one of the reasons. And so, yeah, and get into it.
I think we're going to have you both on again for a separate session on consolidation in the sales space, because that's a whole separate thing.
Oh yeah,
super interesting. But we do have a question in the chat. Besides LeadIQ and PandaDoc, which tools do you like and do you think actually simplifies the selling experience and makes the buying experience better?
Well, I would say for me, based on my little rant about personalization and relevancy, I would definitely be focused on two specific types of technologies. One of them would be, how do I pick the right account? Think about like what it takes to pick an account, you know, and think about like, what if your account that you picked isn't the right account? You just spent 10 steps and 14 touches and blah, 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 going after the wrong account. So number one is like the best thing you can do for yourself is get smart about what accounts you choose. That's the first thing. And so there's different technologies that provide that, like this guy over here. But there are, for me, that's number one. Number two, to get personalized and relevant in this new B2C framework that we have to live in with relevancy and personalization. We've been talking about this for years, by the way, so this isn't like news to anybody, but we're just doing a crappy job of it. That you want to get an engagement tool, all right, a sales engagement tool that allows you to put the right message to the right buyer persona in the right cadence or sequence, whatever brand you like there. And then number three is the ability to track and listen to the adherence of the play as it is being used by the seller. And that is like call recording software, call listening, revenue intelligence software. If you don't have the right account, the right sequence or cadence to go after for personalization, and the way to monitor and make sure that that's happening, you fail in the game and you're failing your sales rep. So to get personalized, to get relevant in this new age we live in, you got to have the right data, the right messaging, and the monitoring of those messages. For me, those are the top three.
I'm gonna follow your question with something that's kind of a heavier topic here, but you go back maybe 10 years ago, I think one of the things you'd hear about is tiering accounts. So you hear people talk about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 accounts. Tier 1's like, look, this is a target account. We got to go all out on trying to get these accounts. Tier 2 is kind of like, they might be right. It might be worth the time. And then tier 3 is sort of like, I don't know, I'm going to try this experiment and see if this is a good vertical to go after or a good industry or whatever your category is for those things. If you only have 25 to 30 hours a week to actually, 25 to 30 hours a day to actually do prospecting. No, actually a week was correct. Sorry. Why are you going to spend time on tier 2 and tier 3 accounts? Yep. Chad talking about picking the right accounts is huge. The other thing that's happened is you're looking for tools that you want to allow authentic personalization for. Generally speaking, most people are going to be able to, there's different places that you can look for that information. I generally think that if you don't have LinkedIn Sales Navigator in your tech stack and a sales engagement platform, you're missing the whole picture. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is going to allow you to see right from the horse's mouth what your prospects are saying about themselves. You can see job postings where they're listing pain points and needs that their company has on things. You can look at social posts for their most active members of their company. You can see social graphs to find a way that you have an in with these people, because you can't just prospect somebody off of first name, last name, and company anymore or title. It's not enough information. Everybody's doing it. You've seen those MarTech landscapes with 8,000 companies on it, right? When I see those, I remember I used to be like, I'm going to prospect all these people. I'm excited. You know what people see when they look at those things now? They see those things and I think, oh crap, all these companies have B2B sales teams selling to the same people we are. And they're all competing with you doing the same thing. So if you're looking for something to get that authentic connection, I think it's got to be LinkedIn Sales Navigator. If you're going to be doing stuff in general to build pipeline and build brand and build content and do stuff, what you need to be doing as a rep today to differentiate and increase your open rates, your response rates, you want to be using regular LinkedIn. And to do an omni-channel approach where you can do stuff with email, calling, social, put all those things together, you need to be using a sales engagement platform. At this point, it's table stakes, because if you're not using these things, you know what's happening? your competitors are. And they're going to be able to hit these people from more than one channel to stand out. We're getting bombarded with advertisements everywhere. We're getting retargeted when we visit websites. We're seeing posts all the time online. We're getting distracted. And the only way that you could actually make noise and get noticed and acknowledge these different channels that you're using is to use something that enables you to do all three. So that's table stakes at this point.
Yeah. So just to I was going to be like, dude, Ryan, that's 6 technologies just out of the gates. And we haven't even talked about like performance and commissions management software. That's 7. We haven't talked about some of the other applications. Like, what about BI and analytics? Don't you want to know what's happening across the entire organization structure? So, this is a topic about adoption. This is a topic about sales reps adopting things. And by the way, it's not their fault. So let's stop blaming.
How you both framed it up is exactly how we framed it in the report, where it's, say, CRM has been table stakes for a while, but now it's looking more and more like sales engagement, data intelligence are foundational and necessary. And then it flows down from there, exactly what you were saying, Chad. Then there's revenue intelligence, conversational intelligence, but those 3 are the foundation now.
Yeah.
Real quick before we move on, Frank had a follow up on any specific suggestions for performance and commission management. That came out interesting in the report. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on any specific tools.
Yeah, back of house is is important. And what you start learning when you start looking at commission management software is how screwed up your commission plans are, because they're like like commission plan doesn't fit into the commission plan software. So the good news is it forces simplification. So regardless of what vendor, number one, it's going to force you to standardize across the board and think through how you can create standardized commission structures that are simple to understand. So when somebody closes something, everybody knows what they make. I've seen commission structures elsewhere where somebody closes something and it takes a data scientist to figure out how much they got paid on that deal. So that's kind of the key, is that commission management is, for me, that's back of house, meaning front of house is engagement software. Back of house would be commission structure and commission performance management structure. There's a few vendors out there. Everything that you'd look at on the structure. The Cadillac out there is obviously Exactly, but they're the most expensive. So if you're a startup and you're trying to use Exactly, they'll probably work a deal for you if Exactly's on. I'm sure you'd be happy to work with somebody. And then from there, there's just a number of different tiered commission structures as well. But I can come up with a few if you like. So
while people are asking about that, I think one important point though is whatever you get for commission structure and commission management, you want to make sure you get something that's transparent with the reps. We could talk about the hiring trends that have happened since June with what people are calling the Great Recession. You want people to have transparency into like what they're going to make from the deals that they work. It also helps with motivation and stuff. So you want to look at some of those things. You can do a quick Google search for some of them. I know we personally we use Captivate IQ at LeadIQ.
Just put that in the chat. Yeah.
We use Captivate IQ. I think it's probably because we both have IQ in our name. What up, Captivate IQ? That's your plug. But that's really important. Make sure you find something that's actually transparent so you can see that stuff.
Yeah. I love it. Well, we promised a live data breakdown. We got our first bit here. Let me share preview. Something that was honestly the most surprising to me from collecting this data was how low adoption is, even for the top players and even for these foundational tools that we're talking about. I mean, you look at Salesforce, or HubSpot, even what you absolutely need. You need your CRM to run sales, right? Full adoption across the board. Fewer than half said they have full adoption across the board. Same with HubSpot. And we see that with pretty much any category. This is data and intelligence, your space, Ryan. And
yep.
I mean, you guys came out looking great, but there's still, the full adoption numbers for any of these tools seemed, it was just a lot lower than I would have thought. So I'm curious what your thought. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Chad, you mentioned like some folks are going to get left behind. What do you think goes into this? Why do you think the adoption is so low for any of the tools that we're talking about? I mean, Gong, which everybody loves, still full adoption is low. I'm just curious.
I mean, I've got a philosophy on it. Maybe that's why I was invited to the webinar. I'd say for me, it's the tragedy of the commons. What that means is that everyone builds these things for the baseline of people, whether you're an account manager, an AE, an SDR, a CS. When you build these tools, it's you create commonality for usage. You go out of the box and then maybe tweak a few things and say, okay, like everybody go use this application. And people are like, well, it doesn't really work well for me because I actually don't make that many calls. And then, well, I take like mostly inbound, or I make outbound, or like I actually send emails a lot. And so anyway, the point is that adoption on sales teams is hard because we're designing for the common standard rather than specific use cases that are required. And it's a lot of heavy lifting for a RevOps or sales operations team to customize by group or individual. And so what I call the tragedy of the commons is that adoption will not get better until you personalize the application to the cohort of individuals that are using it. And so otherwise, you've got everybody using Gong as an example to just record these calls rather than actually use Gong to actually build out an intelligence framework on how to improve the play that you used in a demonstration. That's a big gap between I recorded the call and I found 3 techniques on the call that I'm going to train a sales team on. That gap is because we're using the applications in such a generic way and not a specific way that I think adoption across the board stays low.
One of the things
Ryan,
that I see. Yeah, go ahead.
Ask a follow up on that, which might take us a little further. It sounds like that's a very clear case for not just the sales to CS handoff, but getting success front and center from the beginning of the sales conversation. So I'm curious. I don't even have a specific question there. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on there. If you can't tailor to those specific use cases, how do you set your new customer up for success, even as you're signing the deal?
Yeah. Look, it's on the customer. It's on the person buying to do it. The person selling the software is like, here, we're going to provide you with X ROI if you use it. And everyone's like, wow, we bought it on X ROI. Then you open up the box and it's a bunch of empty cells. An engagement platform is a bunch of empty cells. You got to come up with the cadence. You got to come up with the messages. You got to come up with the emails. You got to come up with the call scripts. You got to come up with the plays. You got to come up with the workflow. You got to come up with the integrations. You got to do all the work. So what do you do when you're bootstrap startup all the way to Google? You minimize the workload to get it live because they said we're going to get ROI. So that's what happens. It's a tragedy, but the workload of the applications we purchase are on us, the buyer, not the seller. All right. Yes, they have great CS teams. Yes, they have great account management teams. Yes, they're there to support us all the time. But the onus is on us to use the application to its fullest. And so I think that we don't take it seriously. Now add 5 more applications to that. So there's 6 applications that RevOps or Sales Ops is having to manage the launch of, the maintenance of, then you hire 40 more people. Now what? So it's an impossible task to do all these things unless you take the time to create the profile of your team member and the use case that they require and get really good at it. And until you do that, you've just done the tragedy of the commons, which is everybody's using it the same way. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 20% of Gong's capability, and we're going to use 30% of SalesLoft or Outreach's capability, and 5% of Zoom's, Zoom Info or LeadIQ or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. You're using the baseline functionality, and your team is not adopting.
I'll make a comment about this, and this is sort of the philosophy that I think about. you have time is basically the input that you put in as a sales team when you're doing stuff. In a lot of ways, the closer you can get things to be like a railroad track as opposed to just a road, it's the easier it is for people to act off of stuff. And if you're using that railroad track regularly, the idea basically is anything that doesn't take thinking should be automated. Anything that takes thinking shouldn't be automated. And if you can spend, because you literally hire these college kids out of school that went to school for 4 years. Sometimes you hire people that are more senior and older too. But like all these people, they're thinking people. That's why they're here. You're not hiring people like that aren't intelligent. Like you're filling your sales team up with people that can think. So if you're doing that, they really should be spending more time selling. The reason that we get bad adoption is because a ton of the workforce that you have is either older and it's harder to learn the curve of some of this technology, or on the lower layer for entry level people, it's because they grew up using applications with very simple user interfaces. Think about Salesforce, right? Salesforce, which is what was the adoption number on that, Brooklyn? It was like really low, right?
I think 35% for full adoption.
45% for actual adoption for Salesforce, right? Put that in perspective. Everybody, if a sales ops person is in this webinar right now, they're probably flipping out here in that stat. The thing is, it's so complicated to just even get your Salesforce full of information. If you want to reach out to someone new, you have to add a ton of steps to the process. If you want to get contact data for that person, you have to add a lot of steps. Then you got to sync that person into your sales engagement platform and then add activity. And you do all these things, you think about it. But if I want to join a Zoom call, you all joined this webinar, you clicked on one link and you were able to get in like that. If I want to book on someone's calendar with an outreach calendar or Chili Piper or Calendly or whatever application you're using, you click on a link, you look at your calendar, you pick a time, you go. It's all one click. I saw a number that David Delaney once shared over at Tenbound. It was like 60% of the sales force that's doing full-time prospecting is under 25 years old. These are people that literally, it takes one click to post a picture online. It takes one click for them to put any information out there. And then you throw a sales stack at them where they have to basically climb Mount Everest to get something done. And that's why you get adoption low, because you don't want to touch everything in your sales process because it takes too long. So there's kind of two approaches you can do. You can either design everything to be as in few steps as possible and get as close to zero, or you can break out different parts of the sales process, different roles, which I think is something, Chad, I've heard you talk about before.
Yeah. It's almost like specialization of the process. So for example, if you've got 3 applications, why do you have one person using all 3? Why don't you create a specialization of labor pools aligned to those applications? So an example would be at LeadIQ or LinkedIn Sales Navigator, have a market development rep who's highly trained on pulling data, verifying accounts, getting it into Cadence, making sure it's authorized in Salesforce, making sure it's a verified account. Stop, load it into Cadence. Next person, SDR. I'm really good at prospecting. I'm really good at finding the contact. I'm really good at the right message, the right buyer persona. Stop, got the appointment. Give it to the AE. So, and that's right there. That's 6 applications across those 3 people. So now what you're doing is you're specializing labor pools to get more efficient across the applications that they need to be trained on, rather than having an AE who does cradle to grave selling across 8 applications. That is not going to work. They're going to spend 30 to 50% of their time clicking on crap and not actually selling. And so if you specialize the labor pools over time and associate them with the applications, you could probably increase adoption rates across the board.
Here's another big idea to build off of that. And then, sorry if it's okay, I just want to make this, think of this perspective too. Let's pretend that you find the perfect account that you want to break into. You go look at the contacts on LinkedIn Sales Navigator. You find someone that you share, maybe a school that you went to, or they know somebody that you knew before that you could bring up for personalization, or they posted something on social and you have something you can mention in your first sentence to get that open and personalize it or open your cold call that way. What happens when you can't find that person's information? What happens when you put that person in the CRM and you reach out and the email bounces? These are other things that can cause bottlenecks too, which can cause crappy adoption as well. Because like you could find somebody and want to actually rip off an email or do a call with somebody, and if you have that gap, you're going to be screwed. A lot of people are probably thinking like, well, is data a big problem or is that something I have to solve? Easiest way to solve that is to just get more than one data provider. Like you get more than one data provider, you could literally crank your coverage up from 50 to 80%. So you want to spend money on the right areas and stuff when you're doing this stuff as well.
Yeah.
Would that approach mean you wouldn't be able to do, it seems like, I don't know if it's getting more popular. I've just seen people talking about it. Outreach just posted an article on having AEs source their own, like run lead gen. So it sounds like that would preclude a team from being able to do that if you're trying to specialize these roles, right? Am I hearing that right, Chad?
Well, actually, the way you do it is the AE can still do their own prospecting, but somebody can find the data for them. Somebody can find the contact at the right company. Somebody can load it into a cadence for them and say, hey, AE, guess what? We have 200 contacts loaded into a sequence or cadence for you. And we already hit the first button called email and it went through and was delivered. That means it's a live contact. We're not wasting your time and you can go from there. And so specialization is important. Now, specialization has cost, okay? Because now you're like tripling up like the resource pool. However, I have found in doing the math on specialization that the cost of an MDR, the cost of an SDR, and the cost of an AE that flow through the cycle, that 30% of time, that 42% of time, and that 48% of time saved, actually, if you do the math and work the cost savings, it's essentially break even, and now it's more efficient. So it's the same cost, but more efficiency. So I'll help you with the math if you guys want to reach out, but that's how we think about it here.
I'll give you an example of Chad. This is sort of a more creative, personalized side, high effort level, but I'll give you an example of something we do. So let's pretend that I want to prospect into 20 really good Fortune 500 accounts. If I get them, we're talking north of $1 million if we actually end up getting them to close at some point. Rather than just doing like an experimental thing with prospecting, we actually will do an experiment with more than one target account at once, and we treat it like an assembly line. So let's say I'm doing video prospecting, right? It really is hard for a rep to go through the motion of like, find the contact on LinkedIn, read the personalized information, capture them, get them into their different sales tools that they're using, put them into a sequence, and then you're finally ready to write or call the email, and you record the video and send it, and you're doing video prospecting in this example. What's a lot easier would be do all your captures first, do all your research in a bunch, do all your videos in the same sitting. And go through these different wads, and before long, you've made 20 really nice, highly tailored messages toward that target account list, and you're going to shoot back and hear a 20 or 30% response rate, as opposed to just ripping off email next person, doing that bulky response.
Yeah, two big ways to increase adoption, and I'll just quick summarize. I'm sure we have others, but just to kind of quickly recap, adoption can be increased through specialization of the humans that are using the applications. Number one. Adoption can be increased by assembly lining the process or sprinting the process. If you don't have an assembly line of humans and you have one human, then the one human has to think about it the same way as like from 8 to 12, I'm going to do this. From 12 to 3, I'm going to do this. From 3 to 6, I'm going to do this. So they're still doing the same thing. And that helps the adoption and understanding of why to use this application, what I get out for it, and the net result. Why I use this application, what I get out of it, the net result. And so those two keys, we don't have a single pane of glass, folks. It's just not there. All right. We have to use 6 applications. It's just the way it goes. So, and nobody's invented something that we could all sit there and be like, I could see everything in one place. Not yet. Salesforce tried, but everybody's starting to get in front of Salesforce, like SalesLoft and Outreach. They're in front of Salesforce now. So, and then, everybody's trying to get out in front. So those two adoption mechanisms are, we'll call it resource or creative ways to increase adoption immediately. So those percentages that you show, Brooklyn, will immediately go up by doing those two things.
I want to add one more thing to think about.
We have 3? I like 3. Yeah.
I know we're moving through. We got a lot of data to go through. I just want to add one more thing to this too, because I think it's really important. If you're watching this and you work in sales operations or sales enablement, or you're the person implementing this, or you're a sales leader, you're trying to figure out like, how do I make it so this stuff actually gets used? One other thing to keep in mind is involve those people in the purchasing process when you're actually buying these vendors. Authority isn't enough to buy a deal anymore. You need to get all the people that are going to be using it to evaluate it with you, so you have buy-in internally. Get your top performing rep to hop in and try. If you're demoing LeadIQ, for example, get your top performing rep to try LeadIQ. If you're trying outreach, get one of your best cold callers and cold emailers to mess around with using that stuff in sequences and get part of the evaluation process. And you'll have a much better adoption rate later on because you'll understand the pain points that they were going through when you're doing the evaluation, so you're not wasting money. Going through just the person that has authority is more likely that you'll end up churning and canceling that contract a year later.
I think you might have seen the data I was going to bring up, Ryan. Sorry, what's that, Chad?
Spoiler.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, we do it really well at PandaDoc, and our RevOps team does a really good job of forcing us in sales to identify a problem statement by the individual. And if you can identify the problem statements without looking at a solution and looking at software, and you address the problem statements, now you're designing a product, whatever it is, Gong or whatever, to solve a problem for a user. That's what's important here. So that's probably the third thing, is design your problems for the user. Would be my third way to improve adoption.
I think we doubled down. Third way, yeah. I think we doubled down there because my next question was around basically this. So the other thing the data revealed is, I think everybody knows this already, but it was very much validated by the data that sales is me centric. You are selling to a company, but at the end of the day, you're selling to that person and that role and that function. For example, sales. I don't have the charts to pull up on this one. I apologize, but Sales Enablement ranked adoption for sales. Sorry, the Sales Enablement function ranked the adoption for Sales Enablement tools at 60%, good adoption or full adoption. Sales only ranked it at 40%. Same for ROI. Almost half of sales enablers, if that's a phrase, ranked high ROI for Sales Enablement tools, but only a third of sales did. Same for conversational intelligence. Enablement and ops, 40% see good or high ROI. Just around 30% of sales does. So, and it almost across the board with every category, this was true, where if there was a role that was involved with that category of tech, they would almost always rank it higher than those who weren't involved in that. So I don't even have a specific question here. I just kind of want your takeaways from those facts, that data.
Yeah, I'll just say people adopt what serves them. Welcome to sales. I mean, that's just, that's how it works, and that's how it always has worked, and it will always work the same way. That's just the way it goes. You can't force adoption of anything that doesn't serve somebody. Even on planet Earth, if you take out sales and replace it with humans, and you talk about, why would you, do something weird? Why would you adopt something that doesn't serve you? Why? There's probably a lot of good meditation tapes about it, about how to deal with that. But the point is that you adopt what serves you. And so when it serves you and you see outcomes as a result of it, then you adopt it. So of course, Sales Enablement says 60% adoption because it serves them. And of course, sales says 40% adoption because it's not serving them. So how do you close the gap on servitude of what sales engagement is doing that serves the actual sales team? Well, there's a few ways to do it, but I'll mention one. We talk about the relevancy of usage of an application for a person. If you don't show them how it's improving their day or their number or their pocketbooks, it ain't gonna happen. So if sales is ranking you lower than you're ranking yourself, that means you're not doing a good job of showing them the value of how it improves their pockets. Okay, not their, like, man, in 3 years, I would like to become a director of sales. Okay, great, fine. But tomorrow morning, you have to pay bills. And you want to be a 200% seller. You want to be a 300% seller. You're in sales because you want to make money, not because you're doing charity work. So if a sales tool is ranked below, like an operations person, enablement person is ranked it higher, and a salesperson is ranked it lower, you've not shown them how it affects their pocketbooks. That's my direct feedback on that one.
I like it.
Some of
What do you got,
some of that,
Ryan?
yeah, some of that might even feed into the way that us as sales tech are ineffectively selling, not LeadIQ specifically, but us as a space in general with people that are in it. We are so focused on the people that control the checkbook that I think a lot of the time people forget about the actual users and what they're going to go through. And I've actually experienced this from the marketing perspective with like project management software. Let's say I go buy project management software, I start keeping track of it, and I'm like, hey, everyone on my team, I want you to use this project management software. It's going to make everything more organized. We can keep track of tasks. We'll know what's going on. Do you know what I just did? I just created a shit ton of work for my team now to keep up and use all that project management software. And
Yeah.
what ends up happening is a year later, the adoption's bad. People don't like using it. I've forgotten about it because my team's not adopting it, and then I'm going to decide to churn. And I just wasted 3 months of onboarding and these training sessions with their customer success team and best practices and all this stuff, trying to get people to adopt something that I never had buy-in from. So when you're making these decisions, you got to pull people in earlier in the process. But the other part is, I think there's kind of been like, if you go look at like different selling frameworks like Challenger and stuff, they'll go and tell you like, hey, you need to get consensus when you buy. Everyone needs to get wrapped around the organizational change, not just the individual benefits that you have. That sounds nice on paper, but at the end of the day, an SDR is going to use our software because it speeds up their efficiency. That doesn't affect sales ops at all. They're not thinking about that. So you want to try, and I think a good way to think about it is when you're communicating and selling this stuff internally to people, sell them on the consensus reason that you purchased it for the organization, and then come up with some reasons to sell it internally with the people there. One organization that's really good at this actually is Twilio is actually really good at this. Big company, publicly traded. If you go and talk to people, I've talked to reps at Twilio before, and you know what they do? They actually will go purchase vendors, and when they do quarterly sales kickoffs every quarter. They'll just basically do open houses where people can go jump into a session and where they can pick what vendors they want to use in their stack. And they have hundreds of reps that are on using this for their prospecting and stuff. And what they basically say is, hey, you run your own business, you do your own pipeline, you do you. We want you to follow our process and best practices for some baseline stuff. But these are the different vendors that you're allowed to choose and use if you'd like. And what that does is it gives them a feeling of authority on some stuff for adoption, and they just go through and get a showcase of what vendors are allowed to use and get training on that stuff. And it works really wonderfully with them because I've seen like some reps that are using outreach paired up with Gong, and some other reps might be saying, you know what, I'm not very good at calling. I'm a lot better at doing the email piece, and they might spend a little bit more time and effort focusing on learning the outreach part. So you want to give them some sort of ownership in the tech that you're giving, whether it's pre-sale or post-sale afterward, and letting them pick what they want in their stack a little bit. Because people like choice. We're all individuals, and because sales is that me-centric kind of like you're literally compensated based on how you do individually. That's kind of a better way to do it. Is like give people that illusion of choice, like they're running their own business in their own pipe.
Yeah. Any tips for if you're not? I mean, I know you can still make this pitch, but it's pretty straightforward when you're selling to a seller. Like, look, I can make your numbers go up this way, the way you want them, so that you can hit those goals. But if you're not selling into the sales space, how does that translate into like tying it to the actual ROI and the numbers that you're talking about? If you're talking about, I don't know, time saved or more productive team or whatever, how do you make that concrete for the prospect?
If your team's larger, I think one thing that could really help if you work in operations, maybe tap someone in marketing or get an intern and try and make a couple of case studies internally for technology you're using. Like I know it sounds ridiculous because you bought the software, but if you want more people to use Salesforce, show them what they can do at Salesforce. Like show them reports you can run, show them how they could find things that might be slipping through the cracks. If you're using outreach, maybe you're taking advantage of the cold emails that you're sending and you're kind of blasting through sequences and stuff. Show them how to use the reporting, show them how to track their response rates, show them how to act off of the response rates. You can have someone make internal stuff that's kind of designed more to say, hey, sales is an art. These are the paints that we're giving you. Go figure out how you want to paint it and how you want to use it. You can make materials to do that stuff internally to support people.
Gotcha. Yeah. Anything to add there, Chad? Sorry.
No, I'm good. Yeah, I think it was great.
I'm gonna bring us back to the big picture, if that's all right, just because we had a good question in the chat. I'm gonna share my screen one more time to look at planned adoption. Um, this is folks planning on adopting each of these categories within the next 12 months, and it tracks pretty much exactly what what you two were talking about at the beginning of this call, where you start with CRM. CRM's excluded from this because it's already almost 100% adopted, right? But then there's sales engagement and data, and then enablement to support for the content, feed into engagement, and then the intelligent revenue intelligence and conversational intelligence to actually look into what's happening. And then sales performance last, just because those others are such a high priority, which I think is funny because that's exactly what you laid out at the beginning of this call. But the question, that order of operations, right? But the question we got in the chat was, what would you say to smaller companies who have, a smaller budget, can only buy a few pieces of software? How would you recommend prioritizing not just the categories they buy, but the tools they're buying, making sure they give it due diligence that'll give them the ROI they're looking for, and prioritizing your tech basically this next year?
Yeah, I can tackle this one. Look, first, number one, as you write this down, keep it simple. Like you can for a small company to try to take on too much tech is a distraction. Prioritize how you enable the top of your funnel first. Use technology that sits at the top of your funnel, like engagement platforms. Build pipeline and opportunities, because if you start closing those, that'll pay for the software. So don't focus on commission planning software. Don't focus on the revenue intelligence platforms. Like don't focus. You can have like one seller and listen to all their calls. I mean, come on, right? So prioritize. Again, keep it simple. Prioritize how you enable the top of the funnel with the technology you want. Build the pipeline and opportunities. Pilot first. All right, pilot it first. Learn if it shows success or not. Now, every vendor will say they don't pilot, but they're just doing it because they don't want to, because their SVP of sales said, no, don't do pilots. It's too much heavy lifting unless it's a deal value of X size. Ask for it. Ask for a trial. It's okay. All right. And if you start seeing success at the top of the funnel, you can adopt other technologies to then hire more people in your sales organization. Wow. Okay. Then as you get to about 5 to 10 people in your sales organization, then you can start looking at additional technologies. So the only one that I would really focus on is obviously a CRM and then an engagement platform to get started, because that's going to help you with your top of funnel. And data is critical. So if you can get a data vendor in there, an engagement platform in there, start small, start simple, pilot it, try it out, measure it, and then scale from there.
We did not pay Chad to say that. but I honestly don't have a whole lot to add on that one, because I pretty much agree with you on that, Chad. The other thing to keep in mind too that's great is if you flash forward to how sales engagement worked, let's call it 10 years ago, people used to just use plugins that would send activities into Salesforce to log stuff. The biggest innovation that we ever had was starting to be able to measure what's working and what's not working. And that comes boiled in on this end. If you're a company that's just starting out and figure out your tech stack, you want to be able to measure the effectiveness of what you're doing. I'll give you an example of something that I like to think about. I like to think about prospecting efficiency score. This is something that we talk about a lot at LeadIQ, and the idea behind it basically is how many actions does it take for me to get a response? And then how many of those responses can I turn into a qualified opportunity? And then how many of those qualified opportunities can I close?
Yeah.
You go through, you kind of reverse engineer those things. You want to be able to measure those so that you know what areas to scale and what to work on. If reps are really efficient and doing a lot of activities, but they're getting bad response rates, you'll know what to coach them up on to get better response rates. If a rep gets a lot of responses but isn't good at qualification, you can train them on objections. You can train them on going after the right account or the right prospect. And if they're getting both those things high enough where you're happy with the number that they're producing, you can go back and say, hey, maybe they're not doing enough activity. And then you can coach them on how to do better with their time management and focus and things like that. So there's a lot of different flexibility of how you can do that, but you want to make your baseline measurable, like Chad was talking about.
Yeah, I'll just add, if your product is, you know, a high ACV or a high deal value, you know, starting at the top of the funnel, working your way down is important. Now, if you're a small business selling to small business and you have high transaction volume, what you're probably going to want to do is start testing out things like these guys, PandaDoc, where it helps you automate the proposal close process and document workflow because you're more in a transactional environment. So again, it depends on your ACV size. If you're selling to enterprise, you're going to want to start at the top of the funnel, you're working down. If you're selling to small business and you're highly transactional, you want to start at the bottom of the funnel and work your way up because you're transacting more. You're if you think of like a PandaDoc as an example, it's like the buy button in B2B, right? Document is the buy button of B2B. And so if you have lots of transactions, you're going to want to focus your tech stack on the buy button, making sure the buy button is efficient and equipped versus the prospecting button. So it depends on your on your company and where you want to focus. Bottom of funnel up or top of funnel down, depending on your average contract values.
I have a question that might be a little unfair or hard to answer because it's a case by case. But let's say you got sales engagement, your CRM, and your data tools in place. How, I guess, big picture, what's your recommendations for assessing when you're ready for new tech like revenue intelligence, conversational intelligence, comp tools? How do you, instead of just realizing a year too late, oh, we should have implemented this, how do you get proactive with adoption?
Yeah.
Do you want to go first on that, Chad?
You want me to? I'm still thinking.
Probably.
Good question. Yeah.
I could ask it a little bit. Or I think one thing is, at the end of the day, every employee that you have on the sales team, it's a battle for time. And pretty much every single value proposition you're going to get, they might say increase revenue, increase pipeline. We all do it. Everyone's going to say this stuff, but at the end of the day, the real battle you have is time and how effective you can use that time. You want to buy software if it's going to give back time that you can do for other things. And that's kind of what I think about. Like if I go buy call intelligence software, if I'm starting to spend a lot of time going through calls one by one and coaching my reps on it, maybe it's time to start considering the automated parts that you can do with those call intelligence things that are happening. Or maybe you're getting on a lot of calls and your close rate sucks, right? That could be a possibility too. That could be a trigger as well. But everything kind of comes down to where can I decrease the amount of time I spend on something?
Yeah. So I would say, I agree. I would also say that, are you ready to scale something? So every organization, you're 5 people, okay? And you're like, you know what? I use Google Sheets for this crap. Okay. But now you're 50 people and everyone's trying to do Google Sheets and collaborate in it. Uh-oh, we got a problem. One example, I can listen to my reps call. I have 5 reps. I have 500 reps. Oh, I need to scale something. So if you look about a manual process that will require automation because you're scaling is a good way to decide what the next platform is. Every big company on the planet does it the same way. Can we use human processing power and baseline logic to get through this task? Okay, yes, we can because humans can do shit, right? However, when you get on the other side of that, it starts getting like, well, what happens if we change the workflow? Oh, no, don't change the workflow. So you become encumbered by your manual process, and software products and the decision to choose them will move you to an automated process, which gives you flexibility and agility to change your business as you scale. So stick manual as long as you can. And by the way, gold here. If you do it manually, you'll know how to use the product. You understand what I'm saying? If you do something manually, and when you get the product, it's like, I know exactly how I'm going to use that product. So if you don't do it manually, you're just thinking of solving it with the product, you're failing yourself. So do it manually first anyway. See if it scales. Then realize the pain, and then you'll realize the value of the product that you need. And also your salespeople will too, because they're like, man, I've been doing this manually for 6 months, and this product is doing the things that I used to do manually at scale now.
Love it. I'm turning that into a tweet. Hat tip, Chad Nuss.
Oh, I'm stealing all kinds of quotes from Chad. It's coming,
Yeah, this
Chad.
is
Get
great.
ready.
Just one last question, just because we got a few minutes left, and I couldn't even figure out how to exactly phrase this question, so bear with me.
Yeah,
What
try.
you just said, it kind of sparked it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the product is just a tool, right? I think it's almost cliche to say that it's not the solution to your problem. It's a tool that you can use to solve it. And so as the sales stack is getting more complex, we're also seeing lots of experimentation and new approaches to sales, things like SDRs reporting up into marketing, things like the social selling, like just new ways of selling. And it's almost like a chicken and an egg. Like, does this new tech come first and enables that, or these new approaches, and then there's products coming behind to support that manual process you're describing? I guess the question is, how do you see these new approaches to sales coinciding with this the growth of the sales stack as it becomes more complex and in the weeds?
I don't know very many 16-year-olds that get a Porsche for their first car. So and so same should it be with a tech stack that is purchased by a company. You don't go out and buy the top of the line Ferrari for your 15-and-a-half-year-old who just got their driver's permit. What you do is you give them a crappy car, you let them go bump into stuff for a little bit and figure out how to fill their gas tank up and maybe even change a spark plug or two. And once you know how to do that, maybe you'll grow, maybe you'll learn, maybe you know how it works, maybe you know where the engine is, and until you do all those things, you're never really going to get to a place where you're choosing the right technology. You're choosing technology to solve a problem you don't even really have. Go create the problem. There's another tweet. Go create the problem by trying it out. Go do it. Go change the spark plug on your own. Don't hire a software company to change your spark plug. Like, go do it yourself. Then when it's time to pull up to the service center in your Porsche, you can walk away being like, I know exactly how that works. It'll take me 7.5 minutes with the team. So get good at knowing how to do it first. Technology is not going to solve it. You solve it.
Anything to add, Ryan, before we hop off? Another tweet. There's like 7 in there.
One last thing I'll talk about that I just want everyone to think about. We've been, in a lot of ways, selling the same way since the 1930s. In the old days, people used to do door-to-door sales. They'd look at the person's door, look at what's in their driveway. They'd knock on the door and they'd read a script. When cold email and cold calling became popular, they just took those scripts and started applying those to those channels and stuff. When we have new technology emerge, we don't have to do it the old way. There's a chance to make a better experience where a prospect feels special, a buyer feels informed, they understand you, they know you personally, they earn trust with you, and they get that information. And I think I just want to say that, like, we don't have to do the monkey see, monkey do thing with technology. When there's new things coming out, LinkedIn voice message, video, go down the list. Don't be afraid to try and think of a new way to do stuff that's not selling the old way. If we restarted sales today, it'd probably be very different.
I can't think of a better way to cap off a conversation on sales tech. So thanks for that. Thank you both for joining. We'll be sending out the recording tomorrow for anybody who wants to revisit it, share it around. Otherwise, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Chad, for joining, and have a great week.